Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's NCCE special event, the Accessibility Adventure, where we're going to unlock learning for all in the digital classroom. You can go ahead and scan the QR code that is on your screen. This is going to take you to our trail guide. This is a resource that has been provided to you that you can take back with you in your learning spaces and implement some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. There are links, ideas, information, so it really is going to be your companion as we set out on this adventure with accessibility. My name is John Pauls. I'm a learning experience designer and professor out of Jacksonville, Florida at Jacksonville University. I'm also a professional learning specialist here at the Northwest Council for Computer Education. This concept of accessibility is personal to me as a former special education teacher and a father to a child with disabilities. Accessible learning and living is a part of who I am. I may not get everything right all the time, but I'm always looking to improve how I design, create, and engage with learning experiences that are accessible. I'm so excited to be joined here tonight with Kristen Harrington, who is a virtual learning coordinator and author at the Florida Diagnostic and Learning Resource System, known as Fiddlers here in Florida. Fiddlers is a resource that helps provide accessible learning to our schools throughout the state of Florida. We are both with NCCE, and we are so proud to be here with you tonight. NCCE, the Northwest Council for Computer Education, is the premier educational learning association in the Pacific Northwest and one of the oldest professional learning organizations in the United States. We are a vibrant community of educators supporting educators. We host an annual conference where everyone can get together and talk about innovative and accessible learning opportunities. And we help schools and districts around the United States achieve their digital transformation goals. If you, your district, or anyone that you know needs support from NCCE or wants to brainstorm on how NCCE can better support you, make sure to visit www.ncce.org. I think it's really important before we start having conversations or engaging in learning that we first frame our conversations. So let's go ahead and talk about the concept of accessibility before we dive in deeper. When we talk about accessibility, we're talking about access. Accessibility is important. Accessibility takes intentional effort, but providing access is always worth the investment. We're going to explore how we can provide access to everyone in our own work, in our own worlds, in tonight's session. And we are not only doing this because it is important and it's our duty to make sure that how we teach and how we interact with the world is accessible by all. There's also some compliance that comes to this. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kristen, who can talk about this a little bit more and why this is an important conversation, especially right now.
Thank you. Yes. So just released, so it's not quite hot off the presses anymore, but it's still pretty new. In April of 2024, the Department of Justice, the United States Department of Justice, released the final update to Title II of ADA, the American Disabilities Act. And in that, there's two key points. So one is that all organizations, all state and local organizations will be following the WCAG 2.1 guidelines, AA. And that stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what you're talking about, it's okay. We're going to break it down and kind of simplify that today and even in future calls coming up. And one thing I really want to point out with that, there are some timelines with that, which we'll get into a little bit tonight and in future webinars too. But the thing I really liked about this update, when they really personalized it for individuals with disabilities who want to build independence. So that was the key thing I kept seeing over and over in this rule is building independence and also like equitable access. So one example they gave is like if you are trying to renew your driver's license online or trying to, so we'll just go with the driver's license. And someone that if they don't have an accessible platform, previously that department might have asked them to come on down and someone will assist them, and that's not equitable access where the rest of us can go on and in 10 minutes when we forget on our birthday we can go in and renew. They don't have that luxury, and that's not equitable. But also their privacy is also at risk there too, because they have someone else kind of standing over them. So that always stands out to me, and it makes me happy to learn all the rules because I'm still learning, and happy to apply them because I realize like this is giving everyone access to what they need. And again, I don't think I mentioned this, but this all applies to digital accessibility. So we'll continue like breaking it down little by little. But that was the thing I want all of you to keep in mind because it can get very technical, but this is always about humans getting the access they need.
Perfect. So we are, and just like Kristen was just saying, uh, as someone who's lived in this space for a while and worked in this space, I still get things wrong. There are so many things that we overlook. Some things that make things accessible for one person may make it more inaccessible for another. It's not about nailing everything all at the same time. It's having these tools in your toolbox so that when you look at your learners and your population and you know who they are, you can pull out the right tools at the right time for the right people. And so this is all about building capacity. And as such, we're going to go on an adventure together. So if you have your trail guide ready, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is another link, goes to the trail guide. If you don't have it, it's in the chat. The QR code is up ahead of you. And this is going to be, again, a guide that's going to help you in tonight's session and then beyond. So before we get started, you're going to notice our path is going to go in two different directions. Our first little detour that we're going to take on this path towards accessibility is going to be discussing accessibility in practice. These are going to be some practical tips that we can all implement when we design digital materials to make them more accessible for everyone. Once we get those tips and those tools into our toolbox, we're going to go take another path towards accessibility in design. This is where we're going to look at how we can make our learning experiences that we design for our classrooms and for our adult learners more accessible using some best practices, tips, and tricks. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and take our first turn, and I'm going to hand it over to Kristen, and she will take us on the path.
Great, thanks. So on this slide scrolling, you will see just a piece of WCAG 2.1 scrolling through. And I'm not trying to intimidate you at all, but I want you to know that if you have looked at these or are right now Googling them and trying to quickly learn about them, there's a lot of this that applies more to like software developers, to maybe web content developers or webmasters if they're like coding a website. But a lot of this as educators, when it apply to us, it's up to our districts to purchase platforms that are accessible. So one thing I did was I looked at those standards and thought, okay, what do educators need to know, or those that are working in these public organizations? And that's what we're going to focus on today with some quick and easy tips. So if it does seem overwhelming, I sometimes have to really search like multiple ways to figure out what these all mean. And it can seem very technical. So we're going to focus on the things that you need to know in order to be in compliance with this rule. Okay. So if we break down the guidelines, they are all focused on these four things. So the first word there is perceivable. And with that, we want everyone to be able to access content with using all of their senses. So that's the perceivable. Operable refers to being able to kind of just navigate and actually use the content or the platform that it's housed in. Understandable, this goes a little bit more into like cognitive accessibility. So are things chunked appropriately? Have we written it so that everybody can understand the content? Things like that. And then the final one, robust. This focuses on, this one is was the most confusing to me. It actually focuses on being able to use this on multiple devices, platforms, now and in the future. So that's not how I always think of robust. So I always like to point that out, that it is a little bit a different way. And if you put all of these together, those are the POUR principles. So if you click John, it will pop up there. Yep. The core principles. And all of the WCAG guidelines are based on this foundation. So if you kind of think about that when you're trying to implement accessibility, it makes it a little bit simpler. And so my portion of this tonight is going to be a very an overview of WCAG and some other tips. And we're going to just focus on these 6 simple tips that will just get you started. I chose these ones based on simplicity of use, also things that are very important, but and would be used by many different users, because some of these are more like low incidence. Very few individuals might need them, but the 6 in here today, these would be widely used. So I think that that was how I chose these. So we'll go ahead and get started on tip number 1. So tip number 1 is alt text. You want to use it when it counts. We'll talk about what that means. So you may have heard of alt text. Sometimes it's called alternative text, alt attributes, or alt description. Recently, I mostly see alt text or alternative text, though. And the definition of this is a snippet of text that describes the content of an image. So on this next slide, you're going to see an example of alt text. And this is an example. It happens to be in Microsoft PowerPoint. But in most programs, if you're adding alt text, you usually will right click or click on those 3 little dots, the ellipses for more. And that is where you will add that description. So you'll see here, in this particular one, it says women in wheelchair cheering 2 hands. And we're going to find that it really depends on the context of what you're trying to relay, whether you would need, what type of alt text you would need. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, because you're going to get a little challenge in a minute that you're going to try to add alt text. But the other thing I want to point out to you, can see highlighted here with the arrow, is marking as decorative. And I think this is actually equally as important as adding alt text, is when you don't need alt text. And that is when you would mark it as decorative. And most programs now allow a way for you to do that. Even Canva, which we're using tonight, allows you to mark as decorative. It may have a different name sometimes, but what that does is it will allow the screen reader to ignore that content. So if we look at this slide here and we look around, we'll see that there's a purple box around the image. I don't need a screen reader to read that. Similarly, down below, the background rectangular box that has the text on top of it, I don't need that. And if I don't mark those as decorative, sometimes it will add a default alt text, or sometimes if we add an alt text, it's going to read all of those things. Now, this one wouldn't be too bad. It would say like rectangular box, arrow, rectangular box. It wouldn't be super annoying, but a little annoying, I think, if I was the one that had to listen to that. But you can think of times where I know I've created graphics before with like tons of dots or something, and if it had to read that over and over and over, that it's not only frustrating, it takes up extra time, but it could also increase the cognitive load for those users, because it's very distracting if they're having that screen reader read things that aren't necessary. So that's why this tip was basically when to use it and when not. And I think the not is equally important. So it's time for your challenge. On the next slide, there is an image. And remember, I'm not giving you a context yet, so we'll talk about that after. And you are going to create meaningful alt text to describe that image and type it in the chat. And we're going to give you a 2-minute timer to do that. So you'll see that image on the next slide. And this is, and by design, a little tricky. So if you're like, I don't know what to put, it's okay. Just give it your best shot. Wow, and you guys are typing already. And I should have said this first of all, there is not a correct answer on this. There's many ways this could be interpreted. So you'll see there's different choices coming in already in the chat. We've got about 30 seconds left. That 2 minutes goes fast when you're trying to be creative, I know. All right, and time is up. And you all gave me some good ones for talking points. So thank you for that. The first one I'm going to point out is Kelly's, which says red race cars. So I can think of some context where that would be appropriate. So let's say we were presenting this in class where it was a math problem or something about cars, and it asked, hers doesn't have a number, but let's say she'd say one red race car, one white. That would be appropriate in that context. I'm going to jump down now to Dixie's, which is very descriptive. Two Formula One red race cars with drivers speeding down a racetrack with a blurred background to indicate high speed. That would be a great example in like a fiction story. There was a digital fiction story being read where you really want the students to really get a descriptive image of that picture. So those are good. So again, there's no correct answer. It really just depends on the context. And also, there's a chance that this could just be decorative. Because if you have, let's say, a presentation and it's just about like quick ways to use Word or something like that, then this probably doesn't even need to be described. It doesn't need to be something that a screen reader reads. So all of these are correct, but at the same time, it really is just looking at the context. So excellent job. You aced that first challenge. We're going to move on to the second tip. This is use colors that pop and also everyone can see, most important. So this is a WCAG standard. It requires that all background and foreground, so typically we're going to say font and background text, are going to be a minimum ratio of 4.5 to 1. That may mean nothing to you, so I'm going to try to break it down a little bit. But if it still means nothing to you, it's okay because we have a tool that is going to find that out for us. So if you see on this slide, we have the checking color contrast title at the bottom in white. So that would be the foreground color. And then the background is our beautiful NCCE purple. I'm not sure what the color is called, but it's a nice purple shade. I might call it Barney purple, Barney the dinosaur purple. But it is there, and that is the background color. And the most contrast that you can have, if anyone knows it, put it in the chat. What are the two colors that provide the most contrast? I'm gonna give you like 3 seconds if anyone knows it. All right, I'm just gonna tell. Oh, Maria's got it. Yes, it is black and white, and that is a ratio of 21 to 1. So that might help a little bit more. So 21 to 1 is the best contrast that we can have, the biggest ratio. But again, we don't really need to know that too much because we're going to use a checker. And my favorite preferred one is the WebAIM color contrast checker, which is conveniently located in your field guide. So you can access that there. And if you just search WebAIM color contrast checker, you will be able to get it as well. So the next slide is going to show an example of that contrast checker. And again, we're using the beautiful purple background and the white, and we can see here that it has a ratio that is well above the contrast, which is probably why John chose this as our color combo for this whole presentation. And it does say it's an 8.98 to 1, but you don't really need to know that because if you just look further down, it actually shows you that they pass at WCAG AA, which is the standard that we're shooting for. AAA is even more strenuous, but we don't really need to worry about that. We're shooting for the AA. And then also it tells you if it meets at large text as well. You'll notice some things on here too, is that it has the hex code value that you can enter for both the foreground and the background. And you'll also see underneath there that there's a little sliding scale. And the next slide is going to demonstrate that a little bit more, because we actually are going to, on the next slide, show you one that doesn't meet color contrast and what you can do right in the color contrast checker. So this one has a 2.04 to 1 ratio, and down below you see it is failing on all of it. But this little slider is going to slide down, and you'll see it keeps going, and that green gets a little bit darker until it passes right here at 4.59 to 1. And you'll see that it does pass AA right there. So that is just a quick little snippet of that webbing color contrast checker. I really recommend it. It's really nice when we have brand colors like NCCE does, or hopefully your organization does, because then you can just check those once and you already know which combinations will work. Typically in a color palette, some will work with a white font and others will work with a black font. And actually the next slide is going to show you a tool that will check that. So I forgot to add this to the field guide. I realized that a few minutes before we started today, but if you Google Cooler, Coolors, it will come right up, I promise. But this is a great tool for generating color palettes. And when you pull up that, you'll click Start to Generate Palettes, and then you'll just click your space bar on your keyboard. And when you do that, it's going to just keep generating palettes until you find one. Oh, thanks, Maria. Find one that you like. And then if you look at the smaller image on here, it says check contrast at the top. It will actually check the contrast for each color. It will tell you if it works with a white font and if it works with a dark font. And then it lets you kind of kick colors out too, if you decide that you don't want all of those on your palette. So this is a really great one because you can check the contrast right there and find a palette that will work for the colors you're trying to use. All right, we're on to tip number 3. We want to style your docs like a pro. And this is another WCAG that can sometimes seem confusing. I know this was one of the things that threw me off a little bit when I first started implementing the accessibility guidelines. So this is a document, and you'll see here that it has a heading structure. So WCAG says that all documents and websites have to have a proper heading structure. So the first one there where it says AI is your design partner is a heading 1. And if you think of it like an outline, when we drop down below, you'll see that that slightly smaller but still bolded text, we have that listed as a heading 2. And then there's another heading 2 below that. Everything else there is normal, which we're going to look at on the next slide. But first, before we move on, I want to talk about how a screen reader works with this. So what will happen is when we think about reading, when we read a novel, we read it cover to cover. We don't skip around. But pretty much any other kind of nonfiction text that we're reading, whether it's on a website, in a book, wherever that might be, we don't usually read that cover to cover. We're usually searching for information in there. And individuals using a screen reader, they also want to be able to do that and need to be able to do that. Imagine just even like a 5-page article where you're trying to skim through, where if you had to read it cover to cover or had to have it read to you, it would get very frustrating and challenging. So instead, what that screen reader does is it navigates through the heading 1s first. On this slide, you only see one heading 1, but you typically might have more than that if it was a longer piece of text. And then it will then navigate to heading 2. So if that user says, oh, AI is your design partner, that's just what I needed. Great. Then it's going to skip down to that first heading 2. How do I use AI now? And they can think, no, I don't need that. Then it will jump down to the next one. How can we use AI in our work at Fiddlers, which is my organization? And then if that's what they need, it'll drop down below that to either heading 3 or in this case, the normal text. So you can start to see that this is very important, and it's such a simple thing that you can do. It is set up by default in Canva. I don't think there's a way to add text without it. I could be wrong, but it seems like it's by default. And then if you use Google Docs, it's there. If you use Word, it's there. And we're going to explore that just a little bit more on the next couple slides on how you would set those up. So this is an example in Word, and you'll see here that it is showing you all the different headings. I honestly do not use all of these. I usually use up to heading 3, and that's it. And then you can simply just highlight the text that you want, click on that heading that you would like, and it will apply it there. But you can also do the opposite. You can highlight the text and then hit update, and it will update that style to match the text that you want. And this is a little more advanced, but you can actually modify that so that it'll apply to future documents. So down below it says new documents based on this template. And if you click that box, it will actually hold those styles for you. And then after you've done that initial, probably taking maybe 5 or 10 minutes to get used to styles, you're finished. And then from here on out, I think it's actually easier than what we normally do, or at least for me, before I started using styles. It is actually a lot simpler. If any of you have ever tried to make a PDF accessible, this is going to be life-changing for you, because if you're not using styles, it can take a very long time. In my role, I have to make all PDFs accessible. So that's the really good thing about using styles. Sorry, I know that repeated there. On the next slide, it is actually going to show that same thing in Google, which actually is even a little bit more simple in Google Docs. So you would just go to Format and then Paragraph Styles, and from there it shows you all those different styles. And then same thing below at Options, if you kind of see how it scrolls down, you can save those as your default. And same thing, every time you open a new doc, your preferred fonts are going to be right there. I know this is just a very quick snapshot. Future webinars, we're going to go even more in detail into some of these, and maybe even kind of do workshop style where you get a chance to try some of these out. But I promise if you kind of dig into this, it is not too challenging to learn. And once you get the hang of it and just start using it literally every time you create a document, it's just going to make it automatically accessible. All right, tip number 4. So we just talked about fonts a little bit, and now we're going to go into fonts with flair and accessibility. Now, I want to do a little disclaimer here that this tip doesn't quite align with WCAG. I mean, it aligns with WCAG, but WCAG does not specify font size or types. It doesn't do that. However, if you search through some other organizations that advocate for individuals with disabilities, they kind of provide an extra layer of guidelines that WCAG doesn't, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So this next slide shows that a guideline to use only 2 to 3 font types or sizes in your presentation. Now, this is just a guideline because there can be instances where you would use more, but you'll see here in ours, there's that header, that beautiful header font. We have a body font and then possibly a caption that might differ. In this case, I just italicized our body font and didn't change it. But you can see that that still creates a visual interest. John created a lot of this presentation, and I at least feel like it's very visually appealing. It looks modern and current. It definitely is not boring. And I know that there's times where I've heard people that didn't want accessibility, yeah, everyone's cheering, didn't or felt hesitant to implement accessibility because they thought it would be boring. Like the fonts had to be a certain way, but it really does not need to be. There's fun things that you can do with those headers, but you really want to make sure that the body fonts are something that's really clear and easy to read. And we're going to go into that a little bit more on the next slide. So instead of varying your font too much, one tip is to use capitalization or even bold or other italics or other font things to highlight those keywords rather than changing the font. And we're going to now go into some font guidelines. So now this is debated. For a while, this was kind of the standard, and now there's still some more debate about it. So you can research yourself and kind of decide, but generally, experts will say that sans serif fonts are better for web and presentation accessibility. So anything digital. And below, you'll see that this is the first one here is a sans serif example. And John, if you can just click one time on the animation, that is showing serif. So the difference is that serif fonts have those tails there, those little tails, and those indicate that it is a serif font. So a popular serif font is Times New Roman. And I said below that sans serif was more for digital, and serif typically will be for print. So if you pick up a book, if you have a novel on the desk next to you, most likely it's probably going to be a serif font, and typically it's going to be Times New Roman, because the it's known that if you read, I should go this way because you're reading this way from left to right, that you kind of follow those tails. But that doesn't typically apply to web. However, there are exceptions to this. So WCAG has not firmly said sans serif, but I personally usually will use a sans serif font on digital because for most users, this is the one that is the most accessible. And again, that's your body font. Your header font can be a little more decorative, but just something that still, the users are going to be able to read. Yep. Oh yeah, sans serif. And then again, font size is not something that is in the WCAG, except for when it comes to that color contrast that we looked at earlier with the body text and large text. However, there are some general accepted rules. So for presentations, that would be either a 30 to 44 point font for the header and a body text a 20 to 24. So our organization, we follow the FLDOE, Florida Department of Education guidelines, and they ask us to have 24 font as the smallest. It can be challenging, but the smallest on our slides. And once you get the hang of this, it is very helpful because you'll see that it's just the slides are just cleaner because there's less text on there. It actually does help with this instructional design as well. And I've been guilty of trying to cram a lot on there just to like have fewer slides, but we really want to try not to do that. And then when it comes to documents, they suggest a header of 18 font and then a body text of 12. And the interesting about this is I know a lot of times the fonts will default to an 11. So I always have to then save a new default. So just note that sometimes they'll default to an 11 point font and we want to try to do a 12 for that accessibility. All right, so we have a 2-minute try it again. This is the last one of my section. And I challenge you to open your favorite presentation, or it could be a document tool as well. So if you want to do Word, Docs, PowerPoint, Canva, whatever that is, and your goal is to choose an accessible font, which for today we're going to say is a sans serif, the font that doesn't have those tails, something easy to read. And then in the chat, tell us what font you chose. What is that font? There's a lot of choices. So which one? And if you do have something for print and you want to choose a serif, you can put that in the chat, but just let us know that you're printing that document. And that's why you chose the serif font. All right, we've got about 1 more minute left. Again, any tool that you'd like to look at and choose a font. And then I'll tell you my favorite, or at least my favorite this week. All right, Dixie said Poppins, and I believe that is the one we're using in this presentation, if I remember correctly.
It is. It's my go-to.
Yeah, it's a good one. Very clear and easy to read. A quick guideline I follow is like if it looks like something you'd give to elementary in an elementary textbook or elementary students, kindergarten especially, then it's probably a good font for you. Oh, awesome. So Sarah was saying she does use Times for the preset font. And that makes sense because for a library, it makes sense that that would be a default because there a lot of things are printed in a library, printed text. And Maria said Aptos. That means you're like a trendsetter because I think that's the newest font that was released. So that's awesome. All right, we ran out of time. Okay, I talked too long. All right. Oh, so my favorite is Avenir Next, or not? Is that it? Yes, Avenir Next. That's the one I've been using most recently. I like that one. But you guys all had ones that you all nailed it. It is all sans serif. So now we're moving on to tip number 5, which is captions, not just for movie night. And this is something that, like John said earlier, that we still have to catch ourselves. And this is one that my network will remind me if I forget to turn on captions. The great thing now, we use Zoom a lot, and Zoom automatically now you can have it enabled so that individuals can turn it on and off, which I love. On PowerPoint, I have it set to always use subtitles as the default. On this image on here, you'll see that if you go to the slideshow tab in PowerPoint and then slide on over to the right, there's that little checkbox to check always use subtitles. So I recommend having that on. And there's times where you can also toggle it off when needed, like when you're having conversation with other presenters, you may want to toggle it off. But the quick directions are on here. Again, I'm just showing PowerPoint on this slide, but you would go to subtitles under that slideshow tab and enable that. And then underneath that, it doesn't show it on this slide, but if you click that arrow down next to subtitle settings, it will allow you to add it like over, on top of, which I don't know why anyone would do that. I always put it over, or down below. And then those are the settings that you can use. So we typically use PowerPoint a lot because it has a very robust accessibility checker, and it has that really easy go-to subtitle or caption settings, and they're really pretty accurate. They've gotten so much better. And then a lot of people I've noticed, they want the captions even if they don't need them. They're just helpful. I was in a training today where they had videos with students and you could barely hear the students. So captions are very helpful sometimes when either you're sitting far away from the screen, far away from the speaker, and it's just kind of helpful to have it. Or if you just miss something really quick, like you weren't paying attention, and then you can see that caption there. Thumbs up if you use captions, like if you watch Netflix or any shows. You can go ahead and move on. But yes, thumbs up if you do use captions in your daily life. Yes, I do too. It took me a little bit of time. This slide is just showing that example I talked about, where if you click the subtitle settings, you can go ahead and click on bottom, top, below, or above on where you can place those in that. And I should have put an example in of what it looks like when they're there, but it really just becomes like part of the presentation and not distracting. It may be distracting for someone that's not used to it for just a small amount of time, but providing that access to those who need it like far outweighs that little bit of getting used to that it might take. So the next slide is just going into in other platforms. So in Google, it's a little bit different. You actually have to go into full slideshow mode, like full, like you're ready to present. And then the caption settings are there under the little ellipses, 3 dots. And you'll see there it says caption preferences. And then from there, it will allow you to adjust like the size, and then also where those captions are. They're not as many options, but it still works really well, and they're pretty good captions. One difference is that Microsoft PowerPoint does allow for language translations. So any educators that have a student who might need it in a different language, it will provide that, whereas the Google at this time at least does not. Now, if you are using Canva or any other slideshow slide deck type program, there is also something called live captions in certain versions of Windows. If you have a newer version of Windows, look into live captions because that will actually overlay captions on anything you're doing. This is also good if you're showing things on the internet. It's really helpful for that as well. So, and this could be something that in a future webinar we go a little more in depth with. But we're moving on. This is the last tip, tip number 6. So we want to create links that mean something. This is maybe the easiest to implement, I think. So here we see 2 links. The first one is a full URL. So number 1, this isn't very descriptive to show a screen reader for someone using it to know what is really going to be there. There's sometimes links that barely explain what is behind that link. But another thing is that's a lot to listen to. If a screen reader is reading out that full URL, that's just tedious and taking up too much time. So the thumbs up is going to the one below, which simply says webbing color contrast checker, and it's going to link out to that. Now, one exception to this, I would say, is if you are providing a print, like a flyer, and you have to put a link on there, you may have to put either a shortened URL or a full URL, not descriptive, and then just have the description next to it. Because obviously they do need that actual link in order to get to that information. So this is an exception when you're printing a flyer or something similar, a little postcard to hand out. But other than that, for anything digital, we want to have meaningful links included. One big kind of no-no, which I had been doing until recently, is our web tool that we use has a default read more. And if you, now that I've said this, you're going to notice it everywhere. If you're looking at websites, it'll have little posts for blogs and it will say read more, read more. And it's nice because then you can click and go out. But a screen reader just sees all those read mores and they have no idea what's behind it. So we want to instead put a descriptive, maybe cut that read more, and actually the title of the article or whatever you're linking to. Or actually say read more about blah, 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 and have it there. So we want to get used to not having those read mores. And that is my final tip. So I'm going to turn it back over to John. He has a much better radio voice than me. So you should be excited now to hear from him.
Oh no, thank you so much. And I learned so much. And like I said, we're always learning and evolving and growing and just adapting to what we need to do. So I learned some things just by listening to Kristen talk about the different considerations. And so that's fabulous. So now we talked about some practical tips and tricks, but now we're going to talk about how we can actually infuse accessibility in our design. Whether we are designing things for our classrooms or our professional learning communities or for our conferences, there are strategic things that we can do to make sure that when we cast that instructional net, we cast it as wide as humanly possible to make sure that we are securing and including all of our learners. So again, when we're designing these accessible experiences, there are strategies. We love a good tip, trick, model, framework. And so we have a really nice one that we can use that really casts this wide net. Before we dig into that net, let's go ahead and again frame our conversation. When we talk about accessible, we're talking about something that can be easily reached, entered, or used by those with disabilities. And when we talk about inclusivity as part of accessibility, we want it to be include all, we want it to be easy to use for all individuals. And then when we're talking about learning design in these next portions, we're talking about the systematic planning and structuring of educational experiences and resources to achieve desired outcomes. It's what we do when we create professional learning. It's what we do when we plan our lessons in the classroom. There are things we can do to make sure that it's accessible. When we talk about accessibility, typically we're going to talk about having multiple forms of the following in our lessons or strategies. Multiple forms of engagement, multiple forms of representation, and multiple forms of action and expression. I want you to think about that fishing net, a big wide fishing net, we're catching all the fish, okay? So one framework that is universally used to create more accessible and inclusive learning is known as the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. And so I have chosen this framework and this concept because it is so widely used, and it is used to ensure that everyone in our classes and our professional learning sessions, that they can have equal voice and choice and engagement. And so if you have not heard of this before, if you have heard about it but maybe not done anything with it, it's a tool that's used to implement the Universal Design for Learning framework or these guidelines. These guidelines, when I show you this picture in just a minute, it's going to look like, whoa, that's a lot of information, but I promise it's not. We're going to chunk it. And so this is how we can use this framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people. And it's based on scientific insights on how humans actually learn. Now, what you'll see in front of you is three little areas: design multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And so this is what we're going to dig and dive deeper into right now. If you ever need to look up these guidelines on your own, I encourage you to do so. It's udlguidelines.cas.org. And I know it looks like a lot. And typically, like Kristen was saying, we would not have this much text on the screen, but we're situating this in the reality that is the framework. So we're going to go ahead and you can see on this that we have different little quadrants. Up at the top, we have the different topical areas. We've got the engagement, the representation, and the action and expression. What you'll notice on the left-hand side is we have sort of different levels. We have the access, we have the support, and we have the executive function. And then within these, there are some details and things that we can do to implement UDL guidelines and UDL frame of design in our experiences. So before we dig deeper, I want you to internalize this. You don't have to put this in the chat if you want to, that's fine. Sharing is caring. But I want you to think about in your professional learning or your classes, how do you welcome the interests and identities of your learners and your participants? How do you build emotional capacity with your learners or your participants? And how do you sustain effort and persistence with your learners or participants? So think about that. If you want to share, go on and write ahead. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about this first framework component, which is designing multiple means of engagement. And you see we go across this continuum. So we've got access, support, and executive functioning. So in order for us to provide access to all when it comes to engagement, you can see that the framework, the guidelines are saying we need to welcome interests and identities. And it gives us some steps and different things that we can do, which we'll look at in a little bit. And then if we want to support our learners while they're learning and exploring and engaging in the materials, we want to find ways to sustain effort and persistence. And then when it gets to that top level, that executive functioning level, we want to make sure that we design options for emotional capacity. And this is all in our little engagement area. So our first level is access, design options for welcoming interest and identities. And so what you can see is some little tips and tricks. Optimizing choice and autonomy. Raise your hand or a thumbs up or something if you've ever used or advocated for the use of a choice board in your classrooms or your practice. Exactly. Did you know that you were making things a little bit more accessible when we're providing choice and autonomy to our learners? We can also do this by optimizing the relevance, value, and authenticity of our experiences. We can do this when we nurture joy and play, and we also do this when we address bias, threats, and distractions. All of these issue a welcoming for our learners, for all learners, in their interests and in their identities. And so like we were just talking about, one way that we can optimize choice and autonomy, just the first thing that I pull from this designing multiple means of engagement is that choice and autonomy piece. You'll see on the right, this is a template I grabbed from Canva. I just went in and I searched for choice board and it gave me this phonics choice board ready to go. But this is a way that we can offer relevant options to our learners, but we're still giving them choice and autonomy over how they're going to engage in the learning activity. So for instance, maybe I am in this situation, maybe I have not yet started to learn my ABCs. Like this is really confusing for me still. And so when I'm looking at this choice board, I may not want to do some of these activities. I may be uncomfortable. It may not fit where I currently am as an individual. So maybe I want to choose to say the following words out loud: ham, heart, hand. And so these things, you can see that when I give multiple ways that they can engage, give them choice and autonomy over their own learning, I'm casting a wider net and I'm making things more accessible for all. The next level, after access, we are supporting our learners with this engagement. And so we can do this by sustaining effort and persistence. We can do this by clarifying the meaning of purposes and goals. Why am I asking you to learn the things that you're learning or do the things that you're doing? I can optimize challenge and support them as they reach those challenging moments. I can foster collaboration, interdependence, and collective learning so that my students and learners have a collaborative community to fall back on. And that leads right into the next one, fostering belonging community. And I can offer action-oriented feedback, give my learners exactly what they need when it comes to the feedback, and that we make things a little bit more accessible. And so when I think about this, I think immediately about fostering belonging and community, and not only our professional learning sessions and our classes, wherever we are practicing and engaging in the craft that is teaching. And so when I think about this, I think about the students in our elementary school classrooms who have a time to show and tell about their own authentic culture and holding space to learn about what makes them special in their own eyes. I think about offering collaboration opportunities where students can get together and talk and work together and share their own unique individualities in this collaborative space. And I think about building community, whether that's pulling in our own community of our schools to get them involved in the education process, or showing a genuine interest in helping our learners impact their community positively. All of these are going to make your learning experiences more accessible for all students, and it's going to address that support level of multiple means of engagement. And then we get to that top level. We are executive functioning. This is where they're doing the things on their own and they are reaching and they're creating. At this level, we want to make sure that we are designing options for emotional capacity. We want to make sure that we recognize the expectations, beliefs, and motivations that our learners can have a self-awareness of themselves and others. We want to promote that individual or collective reflection, and we want to cultivate empathy and restorative practices. They've learned the content, they've explored, but this is where they're really making it their own. And in order to do so, they have to be in a safe space. We want to give them those guidelines and these expectations. We want to recognize them for what they have done. And above all, we want to be empathetic and we want to use those restorative practices. That all makes it accessible learning opportunities as well. And I know that we probably all try as best we can for those empathetic and restorative moments, but understanding now that it's more than just the right thing to do, it also makes things a little bit more accessible. Hopefully that will guide you in really framing these conversations among your professional learning communities. So for designing multiple means of engagement, what I want you to do is I want you to look at what's on your screen and I want you to think about what you do in your current practices, whether it's for your professional learning communities, your classrooms, maybe you do YouTube videos, whatever you want to do. What is one thing that you're looking at this list and you're like, when I create learning for others, I do this really well? I want you to go ahead and brag on yourself and throw it in the chat so that we can all see what everyone is really excelling at. I'll give you, let's go ahead and give you 2 minutes. We have about 1 minute left for this reflective sharing time. Got about 20 seconds. I'm going to say shout out to Dixie, who says that she's really good at promoting individual and collective reflection and providing opportunities for collaboration. We know, especially as adult learners, reflection is key to how we process and how we learn. And so those opportunities are not only accessible, but they're necessary, especially with us adults. Maria tries to make everyone feels welcome by showing the importance and presence and participation in the activity. Maria is always that welcoming soul, so I am seconding that glow. Sarah incorporates weekly journaling so the students can reflect on their growth, providing that structured space for them to really think about themselves, and that's building that emotional capacity. Shannon definitely fosters belonging, and Tim is getting better at offering choices. And somebody early in our chat said AI is really helping with these choice boards. That is absolutely the case. If you get stuck on what choices to offer based on an instructional activity, head to your favorite AI tool and ask it to generate a choice board or some ideas. It's a fantastic thought partner. Thanks so much for sharing all of that, friends. So, we talked about that little area, but now I want you to go ahead and internalize. Think about the following. How do you, in your learning development, how do you optimize perception? How do you address language and symbols? And how do you build knowledge? How do you optimize perception, address language and symbols, and build knowledge? Go ahead and internalize that. This brings us into our designing multiple means of representation. And so when I think about representation, I think about everyone included and present, and we are making sure that we are strategically including everybody and everybody is represented. So we also have our access, support, and executive functioning. We are following the path that is laid out in front of us. We start with the access, we move to support, executive functioning based on what's appropriate for our learners. And we start with designing multiple options of perception, move to language and symbols, and we move to building knowledge. So when it comes to access, when we design options for perception, we can do the following. We can support opportunities to customize the display of information. We cannot control how others perceive our content, our learning materials, our instruction, but we can support them in allowing them to customize their own displays. We can support multiple ways to perceive information, and we can represent a diversity of perspectives and identities in authentic ways. So if I were to pick one of these, one of my favorites as an instructional designer who works with faculty to create university courses is drilling in the importance of multiple ways of perceiving information. This could look like having a podcast that relays auditory information about instructional content. This could be like what my son needs in order to communicate with the world around him, which is symbols, like what you see in front of you, picture exchange communication system. My foreigner students and my son will actually communicate by exchanging these symbols. But symbols are also really important, whether we're putting them on bathrooms or in a slide talking about these things. We can use symbols to provide alternate ways to understand the information being presented. And then we talk about diverse engagement and assessment. One of my biggest pet peeves as a learning designer is multiple choice questions. There's a time and there's a place, but there's also different ways that we can assess our learners that may make our instruction more diverse and accessible. Perhaps one student does need to write a paper about what they've understood. Maybe one student does need to do a multiple choice test, and maybe one student needs to create an art project or do some sort of project-based learning to convey their thoughts. I always say at the end of the day, and my students, sometimes they get mad at me when they're talking about grades, and I tell them I don't really care about the grades, I care about what's in your brain. I want to know, did you understand what we were talking about? Could you perceive the content? And can I assess that authentically? When it gets to our support level, we need to make sure that we're designing options for language and symbols. And this one is very difficult to do sometimes because when we talk and we think that everybody's going to understand us. And the words that I use, I expect others to understand, but that's a little bit of a biased take on things. I recognize that. So in order to design multiple means of representation and support our learners, we can clarify vocabulary, symbols, and language structures. Just because you know that this symbol and learning management system means this thing does not mean that your learners understand that. They may come from a different background or they may not have been exposed to that. We can also support the decoding of text, mathematical notation, and symbols, cultivate understanding and respect across languages and dialects, address biases in the use of language and symbols, and illustrate through multiple media, once again. I'm going to go ahead and hone in on the clarify symbols, vocabulary, and language structures because we have so many participants or learners, people that we engage with on a daily basis who may and probably would benefit from some sort of symbolic representation. And so maybe as a teacher in our classrooms, we're having those little symbols up around the classroom, a little bathroom symbol by the bathroom or direct instruction symbol next to the direct instruction table, something that helps provide additional layer of support for our learners as they're navigating something they may not be familiar with. Then I think about augmented alternative communication devices that my son and so many others like him use to speak and communicate. How can we not only remain knowledgeable about these things, but how can we also support the use of these things as language in our own spaces? And then I think about our students who use American Sign Language, or maybe they are um, speakers of another language. Do we support them with translation services? Do we support them with different ways to engage with the content in a way that's going to make it just as impactful as students who understood the written word and may not need that kind of support? Whenever we include these vocabulary symbols and language structures and we clarify those, we're making things more accessible. And then that highest level, that executive functioning level, how are we building knowledge? And when we do this in our professional learning or classes, we can do that by connecting our prior knowledge to the new learning. That's honoring their lived experiences, that's using their own personal story to create this new learning. We can highlight and explore patterns, critical features, big ideas, and relationships, not assuming that they understand the connections, but really highlighting those connections as core parts of the instruction. We can cultivate multiple ways of knowing and making meaning. What does it mean to know something? What does it mean to make meaning of something? And what does it mean to demonstrate that? And we can maximize transfer and generalization. I'm going to hone in on that last one. Everything that we do, whether an individual is differently abled or not, we are always working towards that generalization. What you learn in school is going to be used in the career, and what you learn in school is going to be used outside of those classrooms. In professional learning, we expect you to generalize this to your own practice. It's just as important to do that with our learners. So what they're learning in our classrooms, what they're learning in our professional learning sessions, how does that tie back to their own unique lived experiences? How do we show them the value of these skills in a way that is applicable and authentic to their own lives? I want you to think about the designing multiple means of representation. And again, I would like you to share a glow in the chat. What are you good at when it comes to providing multiple means of representation? What does that look like to you? You have 2 minutes. I can't wait to read it. And I am catching up. Sarah was talking about the auditory podcast and how a learner said that the screen reader could be draining, and she's thinking about incorporating this. If you've not yet done so, free little tidbit for tonight. Notebook.lm is a Google tool that is an AI tool that you can put learning materials or your website, and it will create a really realistic podcast for you to use. Oh, there you go. Kelly's talking about it. It's fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Kelly. Shannon loves to be very intentional when she connects the dots for the learners. That is super important, showing them the why behind what we're doing. Sarah built a pathfinder about digital literacy, provided an infographic, transcript, websites, books, and articles based on. I love that. We are really building those systems that are supporting them. We're including a variety of tools, strategies. Fantastic. In just a few more seconds, if you want to go ahead and throw your thoughts in there. Yeah, Maria connecting the prior knowledge. And Dixie's always providing written information, a video recording, and a way to practice what they have learned. I love that. Yes, so many great ideas. And so, again, part of me asking you to reflect on these things, one thing, that's what we really should be doing as adults, but also accessibility can be that intimidating word that everybody runs from in the water cooler, and everybody thinks that this is the most terrifying thing. You're already doing a lot of accessible practices. You just didn't understand maybe necessarily that was the frame of reference you were approaching it. And so now that you know that you're already doing some, let's go ahead and do a little bit more. It's just that naturally evolving. Nobody's going to be perfect, but we have that awareness and a desire to do more for everybody. Okay, next internalized reflection. How do we design for interaction? How do we design for expression and communication? And how do we design for strategy development? So when we're thinking about our learners, how do we decide how they interact in a session? How do we decide how they're going to express themselves or communicate with each other? And how do we help them develop strategies? This brings us to the designing multiple means of action and expression. And in here, between access, support, and function, we are moving from designing options for interaction to designing options for expression and communication, and then strategic development. So first they need to interact, then they need to express and communicate, and then they're going to strategically develop new skills and goals. So how do we do this? In that access level, we can vary and honor the methods for response, navigation, and movement. I have heard a lot of things about varying presentation and response and choice, and that just seems like a pervasive theme and something we could all do in our courses to make things a little bit more accessible. We can also optimize access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools. And I will say, as much as I try my darndest to make sure that everything is accessible with my materials, I still probably am not successful for everything. And so do not feel bad, whatever current level that you are at, because there's always more to learn and more to grow. And I believe in all of you. We can do it together. And so when I think about this level, I think about multiple methods of response. And this is something I've been a big proponent with the courses I design, the courses I teach. I, as a learner, do not want to write that much. That's not my preferred thing. And so I know if that's me, there are others that are different as well. And so I like to cast that wide net. So I'll have some written engagement activities, maybe write something on a post-it, maybe turn in a little discussion board. But I'm also going to give them an option to do a video recording, because if that's what it takes to get that message conveyed, then that's what I'm concerned about. And I'm also going to give them some opportunities to institute some project-based learning, because I know that there may be learners who cannot articulate themselves as effectively in a written or video format, but they can really express themselves when they are creating. We are not all the same. And so again, that wide net we are casting is super important. And then we talk about the supportive level for action and expression. How are we designing options for that expression and communication? Do we use a variety of media to communicate? Do we use multiple tools for construction and composition and creativity? Do we build fluencies with graduated support for practice and performance? And do we address biases related to modes of expression and communication? For this one, I'm again going to pick the thing that I think we can most be successful with and cast that wide net. And that's when I think about using that variety of tools. And so we have this toolbox full of tools. Maybe we use this platform for this and this for this. We've got our worksheets, we've got our books. The more that we can put into our arsenal or our collection of resources, the more successful and accessible we can be. So let's have those non-tech options where students creating and reading a real physical book, but then let's also provide a digital PDF and make sure it's accessible. Let's provide some podcast or videos or access to technology in a way that's going to help our learners convey their understandings most effectively. And so that is one way, again, and you're probably doing a lot of this in what you do, but this is another way that we can make things more accessible. And then finally, when it comes to executive functioning at this level, this is where it comes to helping our learners set meaningful goals, help them anticipate and plan for challenges they will face, help them organize the information and resources, not only in their daily lives, but in their mental schemas, making sure we can enhance capacity for monitoring progress, and then always challenge exclusionary practices. How can we strategically develop these skills in the action and expression area? And so again, we've got these multiple, again, multiple ways, multiple ways, multiple ways. We've got the podcast, we've got the symbols that we're going to use in our classrooms and our learning, and we're going to have diverse engagement and assessment. And I will tell you one thing, I talk about we're always learning with accessible practices. I recently, in the last couple of months, have been participating with a group of educators who, as part of their accessible practices when presenting, will auditorily describe the symbols that are on the screen in front of them. And I have not been successful tonight, but I will tell you, in front of you, there is a symbol that says podcast. There is the traditional symbol of the bathroom, which is blue with a male presenting figure and a female presenting figure. And on the right is an image of a diversity of engagement tools like pencils and computers. I am going to get better at this. It does not come naturally to me because I already think I talk too much, but this is a way that I can do a little bit more and make things more accessible. So we all have room to grow and glow. So name one current glow that you experience in what you do when it comes to designing for interaction, expression, and communication, or that strategic development. Go ahead and take those 2 minutes and let's go ahead and think about that. Maria was talking about how she is always coming up with alternative plans based on what may come up. And Tim chimed in, like when materials just vanish. We recently had a lovely time together in Fargo, and on day 2, all of the lovely materials that we had plastered all over the room to use the next day were gone. So yes, we do have to sometimes come up with plan B, but you would never know. And absolutely, Shannon, so great to have these colleagues be accountable, help us be accountable and strive to do more. There's always room for improvement with everything that we do. And Sarah designs courses with a pre-made template made by instructional designers who constructed it to meet quality assurance standards. And as an instructional designer who has to work with faculty to meet those standards, organization in those classrooms and your learning management system, it is so important. I can't tell you how many times I go into a course to help somebody and I can't make heads or tails of anything. And I know that increases the cognitive load on our learners. That makes things more difficult, not as accessible. And then Kelly does a lot of AT trainings, been asking teachers at trainings what's been working for them for accessibility. And just let's see. Gets the building teachers talking with each other and sharing ideas. Yes. It's all about how we approach the conversation of accessibility. I myself have been so turned off on some conversations because I felt like I was not a good teacher because I was missing things. And I promise you are all fantastic teachers or specialists or educators or parents. You're doing the best you can, but we don't know what we do not know. And unless you've lived in this space or had to use these tools, you may not know. I have personally been using screen reader software to read things just to help me while I'm doing other things. And that's when I come across, oh, that picture did not have alternative text because it didn't tell me anything about it. And so I have been trying to put myself in those situations to understand as I design just what that experience is. And you all can do that same sort of process as well. Perfect. All right, friends. So that is sort of the conclusion of an introduction to our accessibility adventure, but the journey does not stop tonight. This was sort of you were meeting at the summit. We are about to start on our journey. We have our map and we started going on a little trails, but there are mountains and peaks and valleys to explore, and we're going to help you with that. So we hope that you will go ahead and check out social media. Make sure to follow NCCE. We're going to put the hashtags and the accounts in our chat for us. Marie, if you could do that for me while I'm finishing this out. But we are planning on having multiple more in-depth sessions throughout the next several months. And so we're going to dig deeper into engagement and dig deeper into representation and dig deeper into action and expression. What does it look like? How does this look like what does this look like in my classroom or my experience? And we're going to embed those tools that Kristen was talking about throughout all of this. And so it is going to be a much deeper dive. And we truly hope that you will come back with us and learn with us and explore with us. The more exposure we have to these concepts, the more we invest our own time into making things more accessible, the more beneficial it is for everyone. So I want to thank you all for being here. Kristen and I will also be talking at the Live from NCCE on December 12th. Make sure to put that in your calendar. We're going to do a more abridged version of the things that we were discussing tonight to make sure that we can get this information out to everybody because it is such an important and vital area of discussion. I also want to encourage you, if you've not done so, go ahead and register for NCCE 25. It is going to be in Seattle. It is the Northwest Premier EdTech event. I was a speaker at it last year, and it was by far my favorite conference that I have ever attended, not only because of the connections, but the expertise and the community that you get to be a part of. This year, we are featuring Dan Fitzpatrick, also known as the AI Educator, and Matt Miller, author of Ditch That Textbook. You may have heard of them. For more information, make sure to visit www.ncce.org. We also want to make sure that we are practicing what we preach when it comes to what we do at NCCE. And so a big emphasis has been placed on making our conference more accessible, more inclusive, making sure that everybody's voices are heard. And we are so proud that at NCCE 25, we are going to have an even more dynamic and diverse voice and thought and practice. We're going to be able to learn from so many amazing practitioners and scholars. So you don't want to miss that. And again, if you are not familiar with NCCE, we are the leading organization for professional learning for educators by educators. We prepare faculty, staff, and leaders to thrive in this ever-evolving educational landscape. We are practicing educators and coaches from around the United States who share our time and knowledge with others. Whether you need in-school coaching or professional learning like what we're hearing now, customized webinars, e-learning services and programming, partnerships, we are here to support you with any educational digital transformation goals. We encourage you to go to ncce.org, contact us, sign up for the newsletter to stay connected, and let us know what we can do to help you and your community. Also want to go ahead and point out that we do have an NCCE Student Cybersecurity Challenge. Submissions are due by November 30th, 2024. We have all the information in the chat. We would love if you would sign yourself up with your students. Cybersecurity is an even more important conversation right now with the evolution of artificial intelligence and all of those things that come with this. And so we need to prepare all of our learners, and this is one way that you can get involved, get your community involved, and we can explore the concept of cybersecurity with our students. Well, that is all we have for you tonight. Kristen and I want to say thank you so much on behalf of NCCE for joining us. Make sure to check the socials, check out ncce.org, and until next time, keep innovating and make things accessible for everybody.